Welcome to the first in the series of the 2021 Science Shorts. These are short talks by early career researchers from the Oxford University kind of research pool who have really interesting things to tell us.
So
Our researcher today is a PhD student here. Her name is Elif Naz-Choker. She works with the LEAP team, so on the LEAP project, which is Livestock, Environment and People. And she'll be telling us a bit about her research into social norms and food choices, particularly choices around dishes containing meat. So, Elif, over to you.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be able to talk to you from the Oxford University Museum of Natural History today. And I really look forward to the times where we can all enjoy the space together again. So today we are going to be talking a little bit about how we think about eating meat, how we make choices about food in general, and how our social environment and network influence these choices. If you're going to take three things from this talk, I would like them to be that: one, in modern Western societies, we are over-consuming meat, and this has significant impacts on both the environment and our health, and this can be mitigated with reduction. And two, our food choices are not independent from external factors and are influenced by our social environments. And three, these social influences can be capitalized on to help people decrease their meat consumption for healthier and more sustainable diets. Before we go into how social environments and networks can influence our meat consumption, I want to talk to you a little bit about how I got here in the first place. I am a first-year doctoral student at the Nuffield Department of Primary Care and Health Sciences. I'm originally from Turkey, and I have previously lived and studied in France and in the United States. I actually started my academic journey as a political science student, but once I realized that I was interested more in how people made political choices, and I mean both the citizens and the policymakers, I decided to continue my studies in psychology and sociology. When I made the switch, I was introduced to theories about judgment and decision-making, as well as behavioral insights and interventions. Not unlike many other anxiety-prone young adults from my generation, climate change and its impacts on our planet have been a big concern of mine since childhood. And I had tried to educate myself on what we can do to protect our planet and our species. But it wasn't until I worked as a research assistant following my master's at Cambridge that I focused on using social psychology and behavioral science theory in understanding sustainable behaviors, in particular, reducing meat consumption. So why do I and my colleagues at LEAP and many other researchers across the world care so much about reducing meat? Well, in the developed world, more and more so in the developing countries, we are eating a lot more meat than we did in the recent past. In fact, over the past 50 years, meat consumption has increased by 30%. There's a consensus amongst most health professionals and nutritionists that a healthy diet should not have more than 300 grams of meat per week, which adds up about to 16 kilograms per year. So, would you like to take a guess at how much Europeans consume meat on average? One of our poll questions had asked you how much meat you think you consume. Do we have the answers for that yet, Kelly?
Hi, yeah, so we had four different percentage bins. So 15 to 25 kilos a year was 67%, 25 to 35 was 0, 35 to 45 was 33%, and 40 plus was 0.
Yes, as I just said, the ideal consumption should be around 15 to 16 kilograms per year. But in the EU and in the UK, the average meat consumption is a whopping 43.5 kilograms per year, almost 3 times as more as a recommended amount. And it is surprising that we have little awareness of it, judging from our poll results here. So this is Eat Lancet's recommended food plate. As you can see, half of the plate is fruits and vegetables, and the other half is divided between nuts, grains, dairy products, eggs, and meat products. So you can see that the meat is quite a little proportion here in the recommended amounts. But what we are doing right now is definitely over-consuming meat and oftentimes under-consuming fruits and vegetables. So recent research has found that overconsumption of red and processed meat can be linked to a series of non-communicable illnesses, including colon and lung cancer, cardiovascular diseases, and type 2 diabetes, as well as being overall linked to higher risks of mortality. In addition to these considerable health risks of continuing to consume meats at the levels that we currently do now, the production of meat also has a devastating impact on our environment. Animal agriculture currently accounts for 90% of all agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, and the production and use of edible plants for feed for animals uses 10 times more resources than plant-based food. Global livestock farming is responsible for about 15% of all greenhouse gas emissions. In the EU, including the UK, this industrial production of meat products has a more negative impact on environment that compared to all our cars and vans combined. Additionally, livestock production uses considerably higher levels of fresh water, it decreases biodiversity, and it heavily limits land use for other agriculture. Now, these are the cold, hard facts. The truth is, most of us don't really know the impact of industrial meat production and on our planet, and the impact of overconsumption on our health either. Despite this, meat consumption is a very socially, emotionally, and even politically charged topic. One of the ways of explaining this attachment to meat is to contextualize the reasons why we eat it. So in the poll, we had asked you why you think you eat meat. Do we have the results for that?
Yes, we do. So one of the answers was, I enjoy its taste, and that was 33% of people. One was, I think it's important for strength and nutrition. Again, 33% of people. I believe humans are meant to eat meat as part of the food chain, 0%. And our last option was, I find it convenient. It is often the most readily available food option, was 33%.
We had quite a sort of equal distribution among the three options, and then not really a lot for the natural argument for meat consumption. So these four options actually came from the 4 Ns coined by a group of researchers in 2015. So they tried to classify the reasons people state most often for meat consumption. It is really interesting to see our results. So let's go over these 4 Ns according to the researchers. So people think eating meat is nice. They enjoy the taste and they think it's versatile to cook with. People also think it's necessary. They believe that the nutritional benefits of eating meat could not come from other nutritional sources, and that is essential for muscle growth and strength. So perhaps not our audience today, but people also believe that eating meat is also natural, that there's a hierarchy between humans and animals, and that we are meant to consume them by nature. And then finally, people think that eating meat is normal. It is the common practice, it is what others do, and it is the default option. So this is what my research is primarily interested in. Humans are social animals, and what I mean by that is not that we enjoy the company of others and are pretty much desperate to have a pint at the pub together at this point after a whole year of lockdowns, but that we rely on each other as useful sources of information. We like to observe others' behaviors to give us clues about what the right course of action is in a given situation. And we care about what others in our social networks value and approve of. So as a researcher, I look at how social norms work in the context of meat consumption. Social norms are a set of informal, unwritten rules or standards for behavior that are collectively created, and they can change across cultures, across time, across geographic locations, or even across different groups. For example, the expectations for how an Oxford student behaves at university with their peers will be different to those when they are around their family back in their hometown. Similarly, the social group that we find ourselves in can also change expectations about the unspoken rules about food choices, what should be consumed, how much, and how others would react if somebody went for an alternative that was not the normal option. We actually care more about what we can observe or be informed of other people do, rather than what they approve of. We only care about the unwritten rules of society that is set by the society that we identify with, a group of people that we feel like we belong to or want to belong to. Previous research has found that if you associate a behavior with a certain group that the individual does not want to associate with, we can have a backfiring effect and the individual can reject the behavior entirely. This can, for example, explain why some people want to stay away from meat alternatives or from a reduced meat diet because they associate these eating behaviors with social groups such as vegans that they don't necessarily identify with or share the same values with. But if we present these dietary choices or not as exclusive to these subcultures or subgroups, but as something that anyone can give a try and adopt, this can remove some of the undesirability and set this as a more widely accepted norm. People are trend followers. One of our biggest evolutionary strengths is our ability to adapt to changes in our physical and social circumstances. We also have the ability to think long-term and plan for the future, albeit in a limited capacity. Capitalizing on our drive to predict what is next and make necessary adjustments to continue to thrive in these new situations, as well as the fact that social norms are not static but are ever changing, can actually help us promote the speed at which reduced meat diets are adopted. So, researchers have found that when they communicated that 3 in 10 people have decreased their meat consumption in the past year, people who were exposed to this piece of information were more likely to choose vegetarian dishes at a cafeteria. So when a shift in behavior is happening generally and contemporarily, we call this a dynamic social norm, emphasizing its evolving nature. If we try and communicate changing trends and try to paint a picture of what the changed world in the near future will look like, this can create a need to pre-conform to the new norm by changing your behavior and adapting before the new trend becomes the norm. So almost all of our choices and decisions in life are influenced by external factors, no matter how independent we would like to think we are. These factors are even more prevalent when it comes to purchasing and consuming behaviors, and in particular, food choices. We are influenced by what is on offer, how it is presented, incentives or barriers to purchasing, such as price promotions or taxes, and what everyone else is buying. And the less knowledge and experience we come into a situation with, the more likely we are affected by looking at what other people do and tell us to do. This includes taking cues from our environment that speak to our subconscious processing of stimuli to reach these conclusions. So, for example, the increased availability of a food item in a buffet setting can make that item appear more appealing and popular and nudge customers to choose the most prevalent item. So I would like to demonstrate this here to you. So what researchers did is they tested this by setting up a buffet, and they increased the vegetarian options. So they removed one of the meat options, and you had 2 vegetarian and 1 meat option. And this actually increased the consumption of vegetarian options, as opposed to having only 1 vegetarian option and 2 meat options. All right. So even the location of products can have an effect on whether we decide to purchase them or not. I'm just going to move these photos around so I can show you the next ones. So most of us know already that supermarkets put the products that they want to sell the most on the middle shelves to attract more attention. And they also place little snacks and other small items by the checkout to try and lure customers to buy a few more things before they move out of the store. So scientists in the LEAP team actually collaborated with Sainsbury's to increase the sale of plant-based alternatives and have moved them from a dedicated veggie aisle next to the meat products. So before, the meat-free alternatives were in a separate dedicated veggie section here next to other products. But in the new setup, the meat-free alternatives were right next to other meat and fish products. I know the photo is a bit blurry, but I hope you can see the difference. So seeing the plant-based alternatives in the immediate vicinity of other meat products actually helped the supermarket visitors to see them, to want to give them a try, and actually in the end of the experiment, we saw an overall increase in sales of these meat-free alternatives. And then when it comes to ordering food at a restaurant, the order and classification of how dishes are presented can also have an effect on our choices. So researchers have found that when plant-based dishes are separated and presented in a separate vegetarian dishes section, I don't know if you guys can see it here, but I'm trying to show it to you. So when the vegetarian dishes are separated in another section, they don't get picked out as much. But if the vegetarian dishes are integrated into the totality of the menu, and on top of that, if a vegetarian dish is highlighted as the chef's special, this actually sees a good increase in the selection of vegetarian options. Another experiment made the vegetarian and fish dishes the default in a set menu for lunch and said meat dishes were only available upon request. So this actually saw that very, very few people asked for a meat dish, and they actually went for the default vegetarian option instead. So we tend to think of these nudges and behavioral interventions to be distinct methods to increase consumption of plant-based dishes and decreasing meat intake. But another way of thinking about it is, how do these give us the subconscious message that the social norm is to choose the plant-based option. So with availability, we provide more versions of vegetarian dishes and less of the meat-based dishes. Through this, we are giving the message that vegetarian dishes are popular and are in high demand, so much so that a larger variety of them had to be put on offer. We think the demand has driven the supply here. With positioning in the supermarkets, we are reminded that these meat-free alternatives are available and once they're presented next to the meat, and that they're not in a separate healthy foods or free from aisle, which we might not even walk through. We are exposed to the selection of products more saliently, and we can infer that there is supermarket goers who seek out and want to buy these meat-free alternatives. And the fact that the supermarket also wants to highlight these products so that they have placed them in some more visible location. Again, we can see that there's a demand and that the supply has responded to it. With the menu placement, classifying plant-based dishes under a separate vegetarian section highlights that they are the exception to the rule, and they're not what is often chosen. In contrast, making the vegetarian option the default, and then on top of that, highlighting that it is what the chef recommends, it creates the sense that the social norm is to not eat meat and to go for the vegetarian option, and that if you do ask for the meat dish, you will actually be going against the norm. So we make countless decisions and choices in a given day, some big and some small. Our cognitive capacity is limited, and we are unable to objectively and rationally assess the costs and benefits of each and every decision we make. So we resort to mental shortcuts that have previously led us to the right options. We can think about social norms as one of these mental shortcuts. At its basis, a norm tells us, when in doubt, follow the crowd. Do what others do and you will be fine because they are already probably doing it for the right reasons. Besides being explicitly told what other people do and how they're changing their behaviors, we also perceive and process subconscious cues about social norms, as we talked about, such as the popularity of an item implied by its availability, its positioning, and its highlighted presentation. So currently, we really overestimate the amount of meat we need to eat, and we underestimate the negative impacts it has on our environment and on our health. Reducing our meat consumption is one of the most individually impactful and helpful things we can do to help mitigate climate change by curbing our greenhouse gas emissions, limiting our water use, promoting diversity, and freeing up land use for diverse agriculture as well. It is also great for our health. It helps us maintain a good body weight. It decreases our risk of certain diseases such as cardiovascular illnesses and certain types of cancers too. In a world where almost all our decisions are influenced by myriad external factors, researchers like me are trying to use the power of social norms to promote more sustainable and healthier diets for a better future for us all. Well, thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to answering questions if there's any.
Thank you very much, Elif. That was really interesting. So if anybody has any questions, then you're welcome to ask them either in any chat that you have open to you at the moment. So YouTube is probably the best one, as well as a Zoom webinar, but we also have Twitter or Facebook that we will try and pick up, if that's possible. So one question I had, Elif, I was just wondering, so you said with the menu, when you integrate vegetarian dishes into the menu, and you say that, am I right in thinking that it kind of normalizes the vegetarian dishes as, you know, kind of options for us all, not just vegetarians. So how much do you think that possibly meat eaters are kind of ordering them like by mistake? Like how do you kind of tackle that? Is that something that you've encountered?
So I don't think the research has accounted for that, but I know that for a fact so if something's offered to us as the most popular or readily available option, we often don't go out of our way to change our options. So for example, if you are signing up for a catered event, and if the default is vegetarian, you're not really going to go ahead and say, hey, actually, I want a meat-based option. So yes, the meat eaters are perhaps by accident consuming vegetarian options, but overall that works for the reduction of meat consumption globally. So I think we can say that that's actually still a good method.
Yeah, true. Okay. So we've got a question from Lucy Yates, and she asks, if social norms are important, could you tell us more about how meat eating changes when people eat in groups? That's a really interesting one.
Yeah, that's actually what I am trying to do, explore a little bit as part of my PhD right now. we actually did a few survey studies, which of the results we haven't analyzed it, so I couldn't share with you today, but we are trying to understand how much people think their friends and family influence their choices and how much they want to sort of consume similar foods to their friends and family. And we're trying to understand whether eating in groups actually has an effect. The interesting thing is like that people really want to think that their choices are independent. And if you ask them sort of consciously, they will say, yeah, no, nothing influences me. I only make up my mind. But actually, if we do observe them in group setting, we do see them going for similar things. If a dish is cooked at home, you're not really going to go out of your way and cook something separate for yourself if you're eating as a group of friends or as a family. Are there any other questions?
Brilliant. Yeah, so Eleanor asks, do you think having vegetarian food in the meat aisle may put off the vegetarians? It does for me, she adds.
Actually, a really good question. So this was quite a new trial. I think Sainsbury's was the first supermarket that collaborated with Leap and sort of changed the positioning of meat products, meat-free products. I think a used supermarket in the US also tried the same thing, and they both seem to find that it worked positively. But I think this needs to be repeated in other settings, maybe more stores, more locations to really see if there's a sort of general backfiring effect too for, as you said, for other like already vegetarians or already people who are already non-meat eaters, they might be put off to see it right next to the meat products. I think this method works more for introducing people who are sort of are big meat eaters and are only being newly introduced to the meat-free alternatives. I think this method works more for them rather than those with established meat-free diets.
Great. So we've got a couple more minutes. If anybody has any more questions, you can carry on. Oh, we've got a few through. So VB asks, what 2 or 3 steps will you recommend to university outlets and colleges to reduce the meat consumption by their customers?
So perhaps sort of changing what we have on offer, increasing the number of vegetarian dishes and significantly decreasing the meat dishes on offer can try and motivate people. I know more sort of radical things like meat-free Mondays kind of tends to have some negative response from a certain population in the universities and colleges, but I think perhaps just increasing the availability of vegetarian options and then cutting back the number of meat options available could be a good halfway sort of method.
Excellent. So I think that's it. We're good. So one thing that people can do if they want to find out more about this is they can follow the Leap team on they're on Twitter, aren't they? And Elif, could you remind me, you have a Twitter handle as well, so they can follow your work? We have a couple more questions coming through. Sorry. Thank you very much, everybody, and Elif for bearing with us while we kind of try and smooth out some of this technology. Right, great. So do you think there is an age or generational challenge with meat consumption? So I know many younger people that are vegan or vegetarian, but few with the older generations. Have they looked into these subgroups by age and if younger are more influenced?
Is a nationwide study. It's called the NDNS. I can't really remember what it stands for right now, but it actually tracks people over time and kind of checks in with them to ask their meat consumption and then sort of analyzes this across age. And like you have brought up, the younger population tends to be more likely to want to adopt vegetarian and vegan options. But then we see a similar trend in the more older generation as well. And I would like to speculate and think they're probably doing it for more health concerns, perhaps. But I think the problem that we see is in sort of the middle, sort of 35 to 65, that age generation. So they tend to be consuming meat a bit more compared to the younger and older age groups. So we can try and think what's going on there and how can we target that age group in particular to help them reduce their meat consumption as well. But a good thing to capitalize on is like catching people at transitionary moments in life. So if you're starting a new job, if you're locating to a new city, if you're starting a new university, it's a great time where you're more open to change and open to trying new things. So if as researchers or as, you know, food providers, if we can catch people at those transitionary moments, we can introduce them to new ways of thinking about their diet and sort of introduce meat-free alternatives or suggest that they reduce their meat consumption. So yeah, I think at any age, we can go through these transitionary moments. And if we can capitalize on them, I think we can create some change.
So we've got a kind of almost a part two to that question, which is that it sounds like something perceived as cool can be more powerful and successful than one perceived as good for us or right for us in our future. Is there anything generational in this perception? Do you have any idea?
That's a really good question. I don't really know about the demographic factor in that. I just do know that novelty excites us all. And for example, when it comes to, again, to plant-based dishes, there was one trial that tried to introduce these meat-free dishes as healthy. So it was like sort of low calorie or like whatever, packed with vitamins, that kind of introduction. And that didn't seem to do the trick. But if you introduced it as like zesty and spicy and exotic and like sort of trying to underlie the novelty of the ingredients in it and the taste, it actually made people try and buy those plant-based dishes more. So yeah, I don't know if there's a generational difference, but overall as people, I do think we are more drawn to novelty than what is good for us, unfortunately.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're ending on the dot, if that's all right. So thank you very much, Elif. That was absolutely fascinating. And thank you all for joining us. If you are interested in our consumption of meat and the impact that it has on the environment and your health, then please stay tuned to the kind of events page on our website, where you'll be able to see the Meet the Future exhibition that is coming up on the 28th of May that we've been working on in concert with LEAP, with the LEAP project team. And also we'll be running more science shorts, more digital ones, and potentially in the future back in this beautiful space. So thank you very much, everybody, and bye from us.